The Revell model kit came in a box with a painting on the front that was better than any movie poster you had ever seen. A battleship cutting through gray Atlantic water, a Mustang fighter trailing smoke over France, a Saturn V rocket standing on the pad at Cape Canaveral with the sun behind it. You were 9 years old and you held that box against your chest in the hobby shop, and you knew that whatever was inside was going to change the next 3 weekends of your life. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. The painting was everything. Before you opened the box, before you saw a single part or read a single instruction, that painting on the front told you what you were about to become. Not a boy at a kitchen table, a shipbuilder, a fighter pilot, an engineer at NASA. Revell hired real artists to paint those box covers, men who understood light and shadow and the way water breaks against a steel hull. And every one of those paintings was a promise. The promise was, if you are patient enough, if your hands are steady enough, if you follow every step and do not rush, the thing inside this box will look like the thing on the front. It almost never did. But the promise was enough to make you believe, and believing was enough to make you start, and starting was enough to change everything about the way you spent your Saturdays for the rest of your childhood. You opened the box and the smell hit you before your eyes adjusted to what was inside. Plastic and cardboard and something faintly chemical that you would spend the rest of your life associating with concentration. The parts were still on their frames, runners they called them, gray or olive drab or navy blue, dozens of tiny pieces connected by thin plastic bridges that you had to cut with a hobby knife or snap with your thumbnail. The instruction sheet unfolded to the size of a road map and was covered in diagrams so precise and so patient that they assumed you had never held a tube of glue in your life. Step 1 was always the cockpit or the hull or the chassis. Step 47 was the last decal. Between 1 and 47, you built something with your hands that did not exist in the world until you made it. You spread newspaper across the kitchen table because your mother had made it clear that if one drop of paint touched the wood, this hobby was finished. The Testor's glue came in a silver tube with an orange cap, and the trick was to use less than you thought you needed because too much glue melted the plastic and turned a clean seam into a lumpy scar that no amount of sanding could fix. You learned that the first time. You learned it by ruining the fuselage of a P-51 Mustang at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning and sitting there staring at the warped plastic with a feeling in your stomach that was closer to grief than frustration. Your father looked over from behind his newspaper and said nothing because he had built enough kits himself to know that the lesson had already been taught and no words were going to improve it. The painting was where you became an artist without knowing it. Testor's enamel paint came in small square glass bottles with metal lids that stuck shut if you did not clean them perfectly after every use. Olive drab for the fuselage, silver for the exhaust, flat black for the tires, insignia red and insignia blue for the stars on the wings. You dipped a brush the width of a matchstick into the bottle and held your breath and drew a line along the edge of a panel and prayed that your hand would not shake. It always shook. The first coat was never enough and the second coat was always too much, and somewhere between the two, you learned that perfection was not the goal, believability was. You were not trying to make it perfect. You were trying to make it real. And when you held that finished airplane up to the window and the light caught the paint and the decals and the clear canopy, and for 1 second it looked like a photograph instead of a plastic kit, you felt something that no grade on a report card and no trophy in a glass case had ever made you feel. You made this with your hands from a box of parts that meant nothing until you gave them meaning. The first kit you ever finished all the way, every part cemented, every decal in place, every piece of chrome trim painted silver sat on your dresser like a trophy. You moved it to the center. You angled it so the light from the window hit it just right. You brought your friend from down the street into your room and pointed at it and waited for him to say something, and when he said it looks real, you carried that sentence in your chest for the rest of the week. That feeling, the feeling of showing someone something you built and watching their face change, was addictive in the best possible way. It made you want to build another one, a harder one, a bigger one, a kit with more parts and smaller details, and a box cover painting that dared you to try. And so you did, again and again, all through the years when the rest of the world was telling you what you could not do, and the kitchen table was the one place that told you what you could. The ships were the real test. Revell made airplane kits and car kits and spacecraft kits, but the ships were where you found out what kind of builder you actually were. The USS Missouri came in a box the size of a suitcase, 400 parts, gun turrets with barrels thinner than toothpicks, deck railings made of plastic so delicate that breathing on them wrong could snap them off the runner, anchor chains, lifeboats, radar arrays, anti-aircraft guns smaller than your pinky fingernail. You could finish an airplane in a weekend. The Missouri took you a month, maybe longer, and by the time you cemented the last piece in place and pressed the last decal onto the hull, you understood something about patience that school had never managed to teach you. That ship sat on your dresser for years. Your mother dusted around it. Your father pointed it out to guests, and every time you walked past it, you remembered every single evening you spent hunched over that table, squinting at a diagram, holding your breath while you positioned a part so small you could barely see it. The space race kits were something else entirely. When Revell released the Saturn V, you were not building a toy. You were building the rocket that was going to carry men to the moon, and you knew it, and the weight of that knowledge made every step feel different. The Gemini spacecraft had 93 parts, including 2 astronauts the size of your thumb that you placed inside a capsule so small you had to use tweezers. You glued on the United States decal letter by letter, and when the S slid off the backing and landed crooked on the fuselage, you felt a frustration so specific and so intense that you can still feel it in your jaw right now, 60 years later. Those kits connected you to something bigger than the kitchen table. Every launch you watched on television, every countdown, every splashdown, you looked at the screen and then you looked at the model on your shelf and you thought, I built that. I know how that works. I know where the heat shield is and where the retro rockets fire and where the astronauts sit. You were 9 years old and you understood the architecture of a spacecraft because you had held every piece of it in your hands. Your bedroom ceiling was a museum. Model airplanes hung from threads tacked into the plaster. Spitfires and Corsairs and Messerschmitts and Zeros suspended at different heights, frozen in a dogfight that never ended. You lay in bed at night and looked up at them in the dark and imagined the battles they were fighting above your head while you slept. Some of them were beautiful. Some of them were disasters, glue smears visible even in the half-light, a wing mounted at the wrong angle, a canopy that never sat flush. But they were all yours. Every one of them had cost you a Saturday, and every one of them carried a memory that had nothing to do with the airplane and everything to do with the afternoon you built it, the radio that was playing, the light coming through the window, your mother calling you for dinner and you saying 5 more minutes and meaning it with your whole heart. Not every boy who built Revell kits had a crowd of friends waiting for him after school. Some of you were the quiet ones, the ones who sat in the back and did not raise their hands and went home and closed the bedroom door and opened a box and disappeared into something that did not require popularity or athleticism or the right clothes. Model building was where the shy kid, the awkward kid, the kid who did not quite fit, could be the best in the room. Nobody judged your P-40 Warhawk. Nobody laughed at your Corvette Stingray. The model did not care who you were at school. It only cared whether your hands were steady and your patience was real, and if both of those things were true, you could build something that made you proud in a world that did not always give you reasons to be. That quiet satisfaction, the satisfaction of looking at a finished model and knowing that every piece was placed by your hands, was worth more to some of you than anything that happened between the first bell and the last. Your father had his own kit going on the other end of the table. You did not realize it at the time, but he was not there to supervise you. He was there because he wanted to build, too. He had a ship, always a ship, because fathers built ships, and he worked on it in the evenings after dinner with a magnifying glass and a pair of tweezers and a concentration so deep that your mother sometimes stood in the doorway and watched him the way she watched you. Two people at the same table building different worlds, saying almost nothing, and understanding each other perfectly. That was the secret of Revell that no advertisement ever mentioned and no box cover ever painted. The kit was not the product. The evening was the product. The silence was the product. The two of you side by side building something that would sit on a shelf and remind both of you of this exact night for the next 40 years. The company started in a plastic shop in Hollywood in 1943. A man named Lou Glaser made his first model, a tiny antique car called a Highway Pioneer, and realized that boys in America would pay real money to build something with their hands. Within a decade, Revell kits were in every hobby shop, every Woolworths, every Ben Franklin 5 and dime, every department store in the country. The USS Missouri became the best-selling model kit in American history. The box art became collectible. The name Revell, from the French word for new beginning, was printed on millions of boxes that sat under millions of Christmas trees in millions of American living rooms for more than 20 years. Then the world shifted. The oil crisis of the 70s sent the price of plastic through the roof. Parents read newspaper stories about teenagers sniffing model glue and panicked. Atari arrived, and suddenly a boy could sit on the couch and play a game that gave him instant results instead of spending 3 weekends hunched over a table for one finished model. The hobby shops started closing. The kits started disappearing from the department store shelves. Revell merged with its old rival Monogram in 1986, trying to survive by combining forces. It was not enough. The company passed from owner to owner, a greeting card company, a hobby distributor that went bankrupt, until finally, in 2018, what was left of Revell was purchased by a German investment firm and moved to a small city called Bunde. The company that taught a generation of American boys to build with their hands is now headquartered in a country most of those boys could not find on a map. The kits are still out there. You can buy a Revell model at a hobby shop or online right now, and the box will look almost the same as the one you remember. But the world around that box is gone. The kitchen table with the newspaper spread across it, the silver tube of Testor's glue, the father at the other end working on his ship, the bedroom ceiling crowded with fighters, the Saturday that disappeared because you were building something and the hours stopped meaning anything, the hobby shop where the old man behind the counter knew your name and knew what you were working on and set aside the paint you needed before you asked for it. All of it gone. Not because the kits changed, because the afternoons changed, because the kind of patience it takes to sit still for 3 hours and build something with your hands, one tiny piece at a time, is a kind of patience that the world stopped teaching and the world stopped rewarding and the world stopped making room for. You never finished all of them. There were kits that got halfway done and stalled, a wing that would not sit right, a part that broke and could not be replaced, a Saturday that turned into something else and never came back. Those half-built models sat on the shelf next to the finished ones, and you told yourself you would get back to them. And sometimes you did, and sometimes you did not. And then you went to college, or you got married, or you moved, and your mother cleaned out your room and put everything in a box, and the box went to the garage, and the garage got cleaned out, and nobody remembers what happened after that. There are men right now who would pay serious money to have back the models they built between the ages of 9 and 14. Not for the plastic, not for the paint, for the Saturday afternoons that are sealed inside them, for the version of themselves that sat at that table and believed that the most important thing in the world was getting the landing gear to sit level. That boy is not gone. He is just sitting in a room that no longer has a table with newspaper on it and a box with a painting on the front and 3 empty hours with nothing in them but possibility. There is a man sitting somewhere right now who has not thought about Revell in decades, and something in this video just put a box back in his hands. He can feel the weight of it. He can smell the plastic through the cellophane. He can see the painting on the front, a ship, a plane, a rocket, it does not matter which, and he can feel the promise it made him when he was 9 years old and believe that anything he could hold in his hands, he could build. He believed it because the instructions said he could. He believed it because his father believed it. He believed it because on a Saturday afternoon in 1966, in a kitchen that does not exist anymore, in a house that has been sold twice since then, a boy opened a box and started building something, and the world was quiet and the glue was setting and nothing else mattered. His father was sitting across the table. The newspaper was spread out. The glue cap was off. And the next 3 hours belonged to no one but the two of them. What was the first Revell kit you ever built, and is it still on a shelf somewhere in your house?